My department continues to implement public sector reform actions which aim to develop both staff and the organisation to deliver excellent services. This work is guided by the successive reform plans published by the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform and the Civil Service Renewal Plan. The latest plan, entitled Our Public Service 2020, sets out the next phase of priorities with a strong emphasis on promoting innovation to enhance our public services. In the area of shared services, my department has migrated in line with the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform requirements with HR, pensions and payroll services completed. Preparations are underway within my department for the next major shared services project, which is Financial Management Shared Service. The department liaises closely with the Office of Government Procurement, the OGP, on all matters related to public procurement and monitors all areas of expenditure on an ongoing basis to ensure that value for money is achieved. The department is currently engaged in approximately 40 OGP central frameworks for supply of goods and services, e.g. the supply of cleaning supplies, taxis, travel management and Irish translation services. In 2017, my department was a pilot organisation for the implementation of the e-correspondence system as part of our move towards the use of common applications across the civil service. We've also implemented a wide range of actions as part of the civil service renewal since 2017. These include adopting the new shared learning and development training, making 60 newly tailored courses available to all staff, the new service-wide mobility scheme for executive officer and clerical officer grades, a gender balance action plan setting out actions to provide a positive work environment, employee engagement and wellbeing initiatives in response to the 2017 Civil Service Employee Engagement Survey, participation in senior public service initiatives including executive leadership programmes for senior managers as part of a new talent management initiative, and the introduction of a single government visual identity. Other initiatives underway include preparing a new HR strategy to underpin the delivery of people strategy for the civil service at local level, and moving the department's website to the single government platform gov.ie, which I mentioned earlier. I'm satisfied that the fruits of reform and renewal are evident in my department, with services and staff who are responsive and deliver quality service. There is a strong track record of the department being able to adjust and respond quickly to emerging needs. Specific action programmes of work which my department has responded in recent years include the Citizens' Assembly, Brexit preparedness, justice reform and the social and economic regeneration of Dublin's northeast inner city.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach. Now, Deputy Moynihan.
I suppose there's two, you mentioned the various policies there that are in the public sector reform and the policies and I suppose the aims of each and every one of the policies. Are the public servants given enough support in terms of advancing those specific policies in every department? Are they given every possible support? Because when there's a change in policy or a gradual change in policy, that they are supported and given the ideals. There has been a trend, particularly from politicians from the government, with any major crisis that's there, that isn't the civil service or the public service, that there are issues there. But we talk about public sector reform. These people are giving huge service, and by and large, since the foundation of the state, the public sector have given a great service to the Irish people, and there are many, many fine public servants right across the sector, whether it is in the civil service, whether it is in Garda Síochána, whether it is in the health service or in the education service. And we have seen, to the contrary, a small minority of people who have abused their positions, but they have given great service. And I think that there are huge challenges that face our society as it's evolving it has to be said that it is evolving at great speed over the last number of years and indeed into the future. And I think that there is need to support the public service in every single facet that they're working in. And what supports are in there, what is in the human resource sector, how is that being supported, and how are people being encouraged, and how are people being, I suppose, equipped with public sector reform, and how that is going to impact on them and how it's impacting on the service they're expected to deliver.
Deputy Louise O'Reilly.
The Taoiseach, the programme for government contains a range of commitments in respect of political reform. These include Ministers of State playing a more substantive role in policy formation and a re-examination of their functions within departmental structures and also their relationships with Cabinet Ministers. There is also a commitment to examine the creation of unpaid roles of parliamentary private secretaries, as well as an examination of the balance of power and responsibility between the Government and the civil service. I'd like to know what progress has been made in this regard, and if that examination has been undertaken, and also what is the level of engagement to date, and what is the planned level of engagement with the men and women who will be delivering on this reform programme. And you'll often hear civil and public servants say that they have reform fatigue, they're busy, they're working, but they don't really feel engaged in sometimes the decisions that are made in the political sphere. Thanks.
Deputy Burton.
Thank you. Taoiseach, for the last 2 nights, RTE has shown 2 riveting programmes about what happened to Sergeant Maurice McCabe and his wife Lorraine and family. I'd like to know if you got a chance to look at the programmes by Katie Hannon, because I think that they will be required viewing for anybody interested in how Irish public administration and reform works. I think they'll be on management and university courses in the decades to come. So I think the key question that emerges from the programmes is, will anybody be held accountable? We know in recent days you've been discussing this in relation to the former Garda Commissioner and his legal position. But I think what stands out from the programme, and this is the one I want to ask you about, is what happened in relation to Tusla and the false allegation of what, for I think any person, would be a truly dreadful false allegation of actually violating and raping a child, and how that transferred to a file and so on. So in public service reform, this really cuts to the chase. How do you propose to deal with something that has been the subject now of endless tribunals, and where a grave wrong was done to a particular individual and the family, and the programme shows that very, very clearly? What are your priorities in terms of public service reform and the need for it, as shown by the tribunals and the particular case? For instance, this House agreed on Sláinte care, which would affect some of these areas. Is there any progress on that at all? We have an agreement as well about an electoral commission, which I recall, Taoiseach, you've been very keen on yourself. But is there any progress whatever? We're coming up now to another election. We've no control over social media in terms of political messaging and where it may come from. We could be in the same boat as other countries who have suffered vast interference in their electoral processes. Thank
you very much, Deputy Burton. Taoiseach.
Thanks very much. Just in relation to the appointment of unpaid PPSs, we've decided not to proceed with that. We're relatively slim on the government benches in this Dáil, only 56 or 57 of us, many of whom, if not most of whom, are already ministers. But I think perhaps in a different context with a larger government or a majority government, there might be a case for having such a role to give TDs some experience in the ministerial ranks. But I think for the current government, it's not something that we propose to proceed with. I do believe that ministers of state are very much involved, both in policy formation, both in terms of the areas for which they are responsible for, and almost all ministers either have a delegation order which legally prescribes functions to them. Others will have a delegation letter from their minister assigning them certain areas, so that they're the lead people in policy formation on those areas. They also obviously engage with the line minister on broader matters, and also through the cabinet subcommittee system. And very often will have ministers of state attend cabinet meetings where that's relevant. So, for example, the cabinet meeting today dealing with Brexit. Minister McEntee attended that for obvious reasons, and that's not a new practice, but something that I think makes sure that Ministers of State are fully engaged in decision making when decisions need to be made. I actually didn't have a chance to watch the 2 documentaries last night on Maurice McCabe. I saw a few clips from it last night, but I definitely want to watch it from start to finish. I haven't had much time for TV, unfortunately, in the last couple of days, given everything else that's going on, but certainly between now and Christmas I intend to watch it from start to finish, and the reports I've heard from it are that it really is essential viewing, as Deputy Burton says, for anyone involved in politics and public administration, so I'm going to make it my business to do exactly that. In terms of the progress that we're making in other areas, progress on the Electoral Commission is very slow. I have to admit that. It was discussed at Cabinet on Tuesday, and I asked Minister Murphy and Mr Phelan to get on with the job when it comes to the Electoral Commission, and the next step is to produce an RIA, a regulatory impact assessment on the Electoral Commission. That particular section of the department has a lot of work to do. They're obviously also working on local government reform and are working on the referendums penciled in for next May on extending the franchise and presidential elections to all Irish citizens, no matter where they live, and also the referendums on the plebiscite. So they have a lot on their agenda, but I appreciate that the Electoral Commission has been on their agenda for a very long time now, and we should have seen more progress by now. And the idea is that the Electoral Commission could replace the Referendum Commission, having a standing Referendum Commission essentially, which would be useful. Would mean we didn't have to set it up and close it down every time there's a referendum. Would also have responsibility for things like the electoral register, could take on responsibility for registering Irish citizens who live out of the state if they're registering for postal votes, for example, under the new reformed presidential election system, if the people vote for that, potentially under the reformed Senate system as well. And it's a constitutional requirement that Senate elections happen by postal vote, which makes them very expensive. Something we need to examine, I think, and it also could have a role in the regulation of political advertising and posters. And the Referendum Commission on the abortion referendum will publish its report quite shortly, and they express particular concerns around the fact that nobody is regulating poster advertising and nobody is regulating online advertising either. But we always need to be careful that in regulating these areas that we don't infringe on free speech. So that's a balance we need to get right, and I wouldn't ever make any changes on those issues without a cross-party consensus on them. I think people understand why this should be the case. On Sláinte Care, I actually think we're making a lot more progress. The implementation office is established. There's a director there, Laura McGahey. Had the opportunity to spend 2.5 to 3 hours with her on Friday, going through the Sláinte Care implementation plan with the Minister for Health there as well, and also Minister Donoghue. A lot of the things you'll see happening in the budget very much speak to Sláinte Care in terms of the move towards universal healthcare, the reduction in prescription charges, the reduction in the DPS, an increase in the income threshold limit for the GP visit card, so that more people pay less for healthcare. It's happening at a slow pace, but we need to do it at a pace that A, is affordable, and we need to make sure that there's sufficient capacity in the health service to deal with that. Negotiations are now underway with the IMO on a new GP contract, and I think if we could get agreement on that in the next couple of months, that would be another very significant step forward. We have the bed capacity review, and that's implementation is underway. An extra 250 hospital beds provided this year. Don't know how many it'll be next year, but I would hope it'll be more than that. And also the Debutte report is now nearing completion, and that's the report on whether we should and how we might take private practice out of public hospitals, which again would be a pretty radical step forward. And there's Project Ireland 2040, which provides 11 billion euros for investment in healthcare, in new hospitals, in hospital extensions, new primary care centres, 120 of them up and running already, new equipment, and new ICT. And also the NTPF has been given an increased role in the management of waiting lists, and we know that waiting lists are not well managed in Ireland. Through the resources they've been given, they've made real progress when it comes to waiting time for operations and procedures. The average person now waits less than 6 months on a waiting list for an operation or a procedure, but for outpatients it's very, very bad. But actually more appointments are missed than there are people waiting more than 3 months, and that says a lot about the need for more reform as much, if not more than more resources, because we've 300 and something thousand people waiting to see a specialist, but 500,000 appointment slots don't go filled, and we need central management, I think, of all of those things.
Thank you, Taoiseach. That concludes